Hello and welcome to the Bub Report, our fourth installment for 2021. According to marine experts, the Eastern Caribbean is a natural habitat for at least 33 shark and ray species, including whale sharks, tiger sharks, and hammerheads. The endemic shark species that straddle Caribbean marine environments thrive within the hundreds of coral reef systems found around the islands, increasingly ravaged by the threat of climate change. Recently, there have been increased shark sightings on popular beaches, prompting local authorities to issue advisories for beachgoers. Although shark attacks in the Caribbean are rare, with most occurring in the Northern Caribbean, we will attempt to unpack and dissect the significance and causes of this latest spate of sightings around the region. Also on the Bub Report, we have assembled a panel of experts to discuss the perennial issue of rape and sexual assault in Grenada against the backdrop of a continued trend of disturbing rape and sexual assault reports. One case was the alleged assault of a 2-year-old by a 17-year-old, the alleged rape of a mentally ill patient at the Mount Gay Psychiatric Hospital, and the case of rape against Neron Thomas for sexually assaulting a 63-year-old woman. The Caribbean Development Bank data on gender-based violence in Grenada suggests that 1 in 4 women on the island experienced some form of sexual assault in the last 5 years. Grenada also has the dark distinction of having one of the highest prevalences of sexual violence globally. To discuss these issues, we welcome our guests: conservation scientist Dr. Stacy Baez, Jacqueline Sully Burke, attorney and legal consultant, Dr. Leo Edwards, clinical therapist, marine scientist Christine Finley, and Kizian Abraham, sexual health activist. This is the Bub Report. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, everyone, and let me take this opportunity to welcome you to our fourth installment of the Bub Report for 2021. And before we get to our guests this morning, I think it would be most appropriate for me to pause and reflect on the untimely and sudden passing of a Caribbean cultural and musical icon in the person of the late singing Sandra, or as I call her, Mother, in a nod to her strong spiritual Baptist and Orisha faith. She was actually very unapologetic about the Afrocentric origins of her faith. I first heard singing Sandra's music as a teenager in Grenada. To my mind, her music echoed and reflected the voice of the poor and the working class. She also fiercely defended the honor of the victimized Caribbean woman. I may venture to say that Mother was a feminist. As a matter of fact, I think she was an apologetic calypso and soca feminist in many respects. The Caribbean cultural fraternity, I believe, is better because of her rich contribution to our Caribbean civilization. May she rest in power. Let me also take this opportunity to extend deepest condolences to the Presentation Brothers College Grenada fraternity and to the family of young Joshua Baldio, who died in Grenada tragically on Friday as a result of an unfortunate accident. So, folks, let me thank you again, and let me take this opportunity to welcome our first guest. That's Dr. Stacy Baez. And Christine Finney, we're still having some issues with her audio and video there, but we will get that resolved. But Dr. Baez, I want to welcome you to the Bub Report. Incidentally, we are both in the Washington, D.C. area. I didn't even know that. I thought you were out there in Trinidad.
Yep, neighbors.
Yes, we are neighbors. We are neighbors geographically in both places. Okay, and I think Christine has finally logged in. Christine, thank you so much And I know the technology can be a challenge sometimes, but we're glad you're here. Yeah, just unmute your mic. But we will get to this conversation here. And what we want to do with you two marine experts is to really talk about these shark sightings, these nearshore shark sightings, because I think it's important to make that distinction, that sharks straddle our waters in the Caribbean. And so, are these shark sightings a new phenomenon? And either of you can jump in.
Well, I think we all know that headlines and press are very powerful.
Hmm.
I think we know that dramatic headlines tend to fly fast. I'm in Grenada. I've been in the region for a long, long time, but I've been here through COVID and through lockdown and through the last few months for sure. And we haven't seen an increase in species or diversity or sightings or it's all pretty normal on the ground, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of media going around, and there's a lot of things we're not fact checking, but is hitting the WhatsApp platforms, and a lot of shares are happening. So it's making it appear, if you're not a water person, that the sightings have gone up. But I have to say, on the ground, we're pretty normal and we're pretty safe.
So you're suggesting that there's a lot of hyperbole there. Now, let us dig further, because I know that in the Northern Caribbean, at least close to the Bahamas, or the waters around the Bahamas, there has been a documented case of several shark attacks. I would say within the last decades. They were not quantitatively very significant, but
Correct.
they were qualitatively important in that it, as you said, it made media attention. So, what do you think contributes to these shark attacks?
For sure. I think there's a lot of components that we need to keep in mind.
Hmm.
First of all, sharks belong in the ocean. It is their home. It is their background. It's where they live full time and we visit. The habitat in the Bahamas is also quite a bit different from us in the Southern Caribbean.
Hmm.
So they get much cooler waters and much higher temperature shifts. They're right beside the tongue of the ocean, that big deep drop off where the sharks can go into the cool and come back into the warm waters of the Bahamas bank. There's just a lot more fishing. There's a lot more species volume of different types of fish based on the differences in habitat that they get in that cooler water shift.
Hmm.
Um, there's just a lot of things that we need to keep in mind. But I think one thing that we need to remind everybody is that I was actually joking with Stacy about this the other day, is if you go into the woods in North America and you see a bear, you're like, oh, well, bears live in the woods. I should leave it alone. You
Correct.
go into the ocean and somehow we're still surprised when we see ocean creatures. So I think it's just important for perspective
Yeah.
that we remember that they live there first, and that is their home and we visit. So we just need
Hmm.
to be conscious of that. But there are certain activities for sure in situations that will make it more likely to see a shark, but we're definitely not in a situation where we're getting vast amounts of differences in shark behavior or anything at the moment.
So, yeah, sharks are not falling from everywhere. Pretty much. Dr. Baez,
Sharknado was not a real
Sharknado
movie.
is not a real
Sharknado is
thing.
not
No,
a
it's not.
No,
thing.
no. And I would just say one thing: humans are not food for sharks.
Hmm.
Um, sharks eat fish and invertebrates like clam and squid.
Hmm.
And in comparison, we always hear it. You're more likely to be involved in an incident with lightning than to be involved with an incident with a shark. So in the US, just for comparison, in 2019, there were 48 dog attacks that led to fatalities. For that same time period, there were 2 incidents with sharks that led to a fatality. So it's not to say that incidents don't happen, it's just not as often as people think.
Hmm.
And when it happens, it gets sensationalized and leading to this false notion that sharks are just indiscriminate killers,
Correct.
willing to attack people.
Right, but I also think just the etymology in the way that we frame sharks, or the way that we frame marine animals, or any animal, right? Because of course we are at the top of the food chain, but we call whales killer whales. We ascribe these titles to sharks, but to your point, how concerned then should we be that we do have these human shark encounters that sometimes end up being fatal?
Yeah, if you are to surf in the cold, cloudy waters in South Africa and a shark comes your way, it's because the shark thinks you're a seal.
Mm,
Sometimes it's they're out on a hunt, and unfortunately, there are times when people are there when they're looking for food. It's not that they are attacking you because they think you are a meal. Humans are not food for sharks. Like they are not. It's not in their repertoire of animals that they eat. And not all sharks. There's over 400 species of sharks
mhm,
in our global oceans, and just around 10 that could potentially be dangerous.
mm,
So when we say sharks, we think about, these monsters with big teeth, but some of them are really small. Some can be quite big. They don't all
mhm.
eat the same way. They don't all behave the same way. It's really a diverse assemblage of species.
Mhm, mhm. Now, what role would you say? Because I know that in the Caribbean, ocean acidification is an issue, and it has been because, of course, we have matters concerning climate change. What role do you think climate change is playing in your research to disrupt the migratory patterns of sharks? But also, we know that because coral reefs are depleting, that can also affect shark habitats because we know that sharks thrive in coral reef environments.
Christine, do you want to speak to the local perspective since you see a reef every day and I
Yeah.
don't?
Um, I mean, it's the reef and the shark relationship is really interesting because there's a lot of research that actually shows that when the shark populations decline, the reef health declines.
Mhm,
So there's a really interesting back and forth between the reefs need sharks to be as healthy as they need to be to protect us from storm damage and provide sustainable food sources for nearshore fisheries and all of that kind of thing.
mhm,
There's a lot of global pressures that are outside our particular singular country borders that impact sharks, including overfishing is a gigantic one. I'm
mhm,
not sure if anyone saw the article in the New York Times this week, but it speaks to an over 70% loss in pelagic shark species in the last 50 years, which is astounding. It's not that surprising to me and Stacy because we've been in this science for a while, but it's an astounding number. So we're definitely not seeing an uptake in shark species given the global climate change and that all the acidification and temperature changes and overfishing that come along
mhm.
with the kind of the global perspective. But
Right.
there's a really interesting relationship between reefs and sharks, and both of them need each other
Mhm,
absolutely to maintain a healthy system.
mhm,
That being said, in Grenada, if I go out onto a reef this afternoon, and we actually have divers out today, seeing a shark is a highlight. Is like everybody gets excited, and it's like the top thing you talk about when you come back in because it doesn't happen that often.
right.
And we would love to say that like you drop in the water and it's like a Discovery Channel show where they swim around you and everybody cuddles and it's a big happy family and there's just so many of them you could walk on them, but that's just not what's going on. So when we get lucky enough to see a what locally we would call a ground shark, a nurse shark,
Mhm,
they're puppy dogs of the ocean. They sleep during the day. They're harmless to people. We get excited for them. And really, if we speak back 100 years, we should be seeing diversity that includes another 10 sharks around our reefs. But if we see one puppy dog nighttime feeding conch eating shark, we get excited because that's what we're working with these days. So it's not that we don't see sharks, and it's not that they're not something to be very respectful of because they're powerful. They can get big, some of them, but they have their own behaviors. They have their own habitat, and it's not something we would ever encourage for feeding or chumming or harassing or that. If you see one, you need to be respectful and sensible. You're not going to put yourself in a situation where you want to be chasing them or harassing them or following them. If you see one or someone else sees one, maybe it's a good time to have a cocktail on a beach lounger as opposed to go for a swim.
mhm,
But we're definitely not in a position where we need to be fearful of going to the beach or doing regular activities. I think we just need to be respectful and conscious, and it's an awesome time to learn because if headlines give us nothing else, it gives us attention on a topic. So we get to speak to people like you.
Yeah, and it's also important here on the Bar Report that we bring nuance to these conversations as opposed to sensationalism, because as you indicated, this story has been sensationalized.
Absolutely.
In my own research for today's program, there were probably only maybe 3 or 4 in sightings.
Mhm.
You know that,
But the
that
drama
yeah,
lives. The drama lives. if because I know we have some Grenadian audience this morning, if I could quickly touch on the video that went around kind of around New Year's, early January.
Yes.
Talking about a beautiful endangered shark near the stadium that was caught. 100%, I promise you, guaranteed, this was not in Grenada.
That was not Grenada, no.
This was Dominica. This is a pelagic shark. This is an endangered shark. This is what they call locally the tuna shark. So they like to live where tuna live. And as much as it would be fun to go to Grandance Beach and see a school of tuna, that's not where tuna live.
Right.
So these sharks, they live offshore, they live in deep water, and they actually really help keep the tuna populations healthy. So it's really important that those sharks survive, because without those sharks and those predators for tuna, our tuna populations, and that's a whole other discussion, but tuna is a very important resource to all Caribbean people. I think we can agree on that. But they help keep our tuna populations healthy. So, but I promise you that was not Grenada. We're not seeing them swimming off the beach. We're not seeing them around Carriacou or La Sagesse, or we're just, I wish we were, but we're not. And they're beautiful, but that was not Grenada. And doing a little research is always a good thing.
Research is my best friend, I can tell you that, as a scholar and academician. But finally, Christine, and I will turn to you. Congratulations, you have been elected on the board of tourism. You're a board member of the Tourism Authority.
Of the Grenada Hotel and Tourism.
Grenada Hotel and Tourism Association. Yes.
Yeah.
So tell us.
You do your research. I can see that.
Correct. So tell us, what would be quickly, if you will, what are you hoping to accomplish during your tenure?
Well, it's not a new position. I've been on the board already for a couple of years.
Okay.
I'm definitely tourism based, because EcoDive, my dive shop, is in the tourism sector. And I've been president of the Dive Association for a number of years, and I've had the pleasure of sitting on loads of different boards, including marine park boards and things. I think from my perspective as a non-hotelier, I bring a more environmental side to the table, which is always kind of my special place and where I like to be. But also talking from a tour operator's perspective, we get to address even things like this that hit the news that otherwise our hotel partners and other tourism sector partners might not be aware of. So I'm definitely in it for more of a tour operator, kind of how people on the ground, once our guests are here in hotels, how they get to experience Grenada from there, from how we integrate getting them from the hotel out into the beautiful parts of Grenada in the rainforest or in the ocean, one way or the other. And then helping, we always tend to cover things like we were a big part of the styrofoam ban for lunch containers.
Yes.
We were a big part of the lobbying for trying to reduce plastic bags. We're more into land use and how we can get sustainable food sources and using local farmers when we can, as opposed to imports. And there's a lot of topics in there that we like to try to cross, but we really like to mix the ocean component that a lot of people don't always consider, even though it's such a huge part of our state of Grenada. And our huge economic zone is mostly ocean when we break it right down. So kind of bringing that to the table and bringing a little more environmental, and then just trying to make sure that all our sectors are staying connected, because it's a really rough time for tourism and a lot of other sectors right now. So it's just trying to make sure we're all communicating and helping each other as much as we can. So,
ladies, this was a very fascinating and important discussion. And I certainly thank you. Dr. Baez, you are in the area. We definitely should meet when it's permissible.
When it's safe, yeah.
So we can commiserate on the fact that we don't have Carnival this year in Trinidad and Tobago. Such
very true.
An unmitigated tragedy. Ladies, thank you so much. Folks, stay with us. We will be right back for the next segment. Stand by.
We tired beg, Lord, we tired plead. Still man wouldn't hear. Every day they're making we bleed. stick break in the air. And the authorities is nothing they're doing. The law needs reviewing. It's time to get tough. If they don't really have a clue, I know exactly what to do. Send them by me, enough is enough. For all their twisted desires, give me a pair of old rusty pliers. Squeeze until I shall castrate, embalm it and then cremate. The Bible say it's a must. Ash to ashes, dust to dust. I have a license to circumcise. Come out to equalize. I go be cutting them right down to size. I come out to equalize. They're bound to stop once they realize. I come out to equalize. Equalizer. Equalizer. Equal rights, equal pain, that is my franchise. I come out to equalize. We're laughing at, eh?
That was the late singing Sandra there, uh, advocating and articulating for Caribbean women who have been victim to instances of sexual assault at the hands of men. The patriarchy is still very much alive. But certainly, this is not a soapbox for me to pontificate on this issue. Instead, we have brought together a panel of experts who work with vulnerable populations that speak to the concerns that we continue to have in Grenada around child sexual abuse, around sexual assault, rape, and such very difficult issues that Grenadian society continues to confront in this period. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much and welcome to the Bub Report.
Thank you for having me, Kellen.
Yes. Okay. So I would
Thanks.
begin. Yeah, I would begin by just throwing out this general question. Are you worried in this period that vulnerable populations are more exposed to sexual predation, especially during this time of great economic anxiety? Kizian, do you want to start?
Okay, sure. Am I worried? To be honest, I'm more worried about the socio-economic impact that unemployment is having on the vulnerable communities that we serve at Grenada.
Mm-hmm.
Well, socioeconomic challenges have always been a challenge pre-COVID, and COVID has now really just exacerbated those challenges. So where we were mindful that it was a problem before, now it's really how do we resolve this problem with COVID and everything that all the implications it would have. And when I say socioeconomic, I'm really speaking to people's employment status, underemployment status, their living situations, their access to healthcare, justice, and access to psychosocial support services. Because with COVID and lockdowns and these measures being put in place, you can imagine that persons' access are even further restricted now than when it was pre-COVID situation. So in that sense, I am worried about persons' livelihoods. Yes.
Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, I think it's concerning. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think.
And Jackie, we will come to you after. Yes, go ahead, Dr. Edwards.
I think it's concerning. I think if folks experience economic hardship, socio-political hardship, chances are that their mental health can become compromised. And I feel with COVID-19, residually, it will create a number of economic issues for Grenadians. And those that are most vulnerable, already pre-COVID, having to struggle around meeting the needs of their family, meeting the needs of the community, will be more predisposed to experiencing significant mental health concerns, and that can drive them to precarious experiences and precarious situations where it can create some real vulnerability. So indeed, I am concerned.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Burke?
Yes, I would say that I'm really concerned. And when we're looking at sexual violence, which is our topic today, the region, the Caribbean region, is already dealing pre-COVID with alarmingly high rates of sexual violence. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we had a global crime survey done a few years ago, which clearly demonstrated that as a region, we have higher per capita rates of rape than the global average. We had three countries that were in the top 10. We had one country that was 15 times the global average. So that is our reality around sexual violence. We also know that in the face of pandemics, rates of gender-based violence escalate, and they escalate for a number of reasons: proximity of families, so they're in the household together; isolation, they cannot access the services, like Kizian said, so the vigilance is not there. Coping mechanisms, negative coping mechanisms like drinking and substance abuse escalate. So the combination of these factors is likely to exacerbate an already very dire problem in the region.
Mm-hmm. Now we do have and Jackie Burke, you a couple, I believe, in 2019, you celebrated ways in which due process is becoming prioritized and regularized by Caribbean governments to protect vulnerable populations from sexual assault. Do you think that enough is being done? That institutional strength is there to ensure that we're holding people accountable. I know, for example, that adjustments were made to the criminal code in Grenada to stiffen the penalties for rape, for example. But are we doing more to ensure that our vulnerable people are more protected?
To be honest, we have done a lot in terms of law reform to the substantive law over the last 10 to 50 years. So you're correct. We did amendments to the criminal code. We did, amendments to our family law legislation through the OECS Family Law Reform Project. So we strengthened our Child Protection Act. We increased sentences. We did quite a bit. And institutionally, our institutional arrangements were also made a little more robust. So we had, for example, in Grenada, 2, 3 years ago, the establishment of a special victims unit within the police force to respond to sex crimes and other forms of gender based violence. But the gradient is so steep, Keller. It's so
Mm-hmm.
steep that even with those steps in the right direction, which we have to duly acknowledge, we still have a long way to climb. And so when you ask about due process, I can offer any number of examples, and I'm sure we'll discuss that more throughout the show, of
Mm-hmm.
areas where we still need to give due regard to victims' rights. We talk about the rights of the accused, but due process also has to be extended to victims. And this is a really, really almost a coincidence, because under the Spotlight, which you must have heard about, that has it's a global project, and the Caribbean is benefiting from that initiative, and Grenada is one of the countries. We are
Mm-hmm.
presently developing a victim rights policy as it
Mm-hmm.
relates to gender-based violence, and I'm one of the persons involved in the drafting of that policy. So this is bang on what you're looking at right now, and there are so many areas: the procedural law, the lack of special measures in the courts, the responses of the police force and other service providers. There's a lot that we can talk about.
Mm-hmm. Now, in spite of these protections in place, I think there are still these. acts of sexual violence are still happening in our communities. Now, Dr. Edwards, I know that you actually did some work on autism research in Grenada, and one of the things that you said you observed was just how culturally, talking about sex in general is still taboo in Grenada. Do you think that that still contributes to what we see with respect to sexual violence?
Absolutely. I think it is a contributing factor. So, although my research didn't look at sexual violence or sexual assault explicitly, a few things came up that I think can be, that we can make sense with how people are experiencing sexual violence. A lot of the folks that I spoke to in Grenada, the way they come to understand autism and disability generally, there's a lack of understanding or misinformation. I feel that there is no real separation in Grenada between state and church. And so the topic of sex is vilified. And so because it's vilified, I think it's contributing to an environment where people aren't having age appropriate and explicit conversations with their kids around sexual health, around sexual education. So there's this abstinence or this misinformation, and I think that is creating a situation where we're not having these conversations about sex in ways that are meaningful and helpful. So the misinformation or lack thereof is really creating a space, and it reinforces, I believe, this notion of white superiority, where, because take for example, you have situations where someone may be in a marriage, in a family, and a husband would rape his wife, and Grenadian society would have a hard time making sense that you can rape your wife. Mm-hmm. So I feel the lack of information around sexual health, sexual education, I believe it's perpetuating a culture of abuse and assault, because folks are less likely, if I'm experiencing sexual violence and there's stigma attached to that, and the system isn't created in a way to support me, I'm less likely to report instance of violence. Mm-hmm. So I believe they need to create a space, an environment where folks can feel as if their story can be told and heard.
Yeah. Now, Kizzy, I know that you also work with GrenChap, that advocacy organization in Grenada, and in the wake of the recent case involving the alleged sexual assault of a 2-year-old, I mean, this is awful, really, that someone would want to violate a baby, an infant, right? But in light of that particular case, you've had some person saying that they're attributing that to a particular crisis of homosexuality, that they're suggesting that perhaps one of the causes of this issue is the fact that there are too many homosexuals in Grenada, which again, I am not an expert on this matter, but Kizzy, can you respond to that?
I can. The first place I went to when I saw the headline, it was UNAIDS. For persons who are not familiar with GrenChap and how GrenChap came into being, GrenChap actually stands for the Grenada chapter of the HIV/AIDS Partnership. And the organization was formed over a decade ago in response to HIV/AIDS awareness and capacity building. I make reference to UNAIDS because they're the United Nations organization tasked with responding to HIV/AIDS in the region. And for persons who are unaware, men who have sex with men are at a very high risk of contracting HIV/AIDS. So for this reason, there's a lot of data that is being produced on the UNAIDS, and one bit of that data that I think that stands out, and I think everyone should try to familiarize themselves with the data, is that in any given country context, the percentage of your population that is estimated to be in percentage of your male population that is estimated to be actively engaging in sex with other men is roughly 1%, right? In any given country context, it's roughly 1%. And if we take the population of Grenada to be 100,000, 1% of that is really just 1,000. 1,000, give or take, males who engage in sex with other men, whether they're gay, bisexual, whatever labels they choose to define the behavior. So to say that there's too many homosexuals, I think it's dramatic. You know, it doesn't really paint a picture of what is really on the ground, because I don't think 1,000 is overwhelming. Mm-hmm. When you look at the other 99,000 members of the population. Mm-hmm. So just in that context, I don't think there's an explosion of homosexuality in the sense of men who engage in sexual behaviors with other men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dr. Edwards, and then I'll get Mrs. Burke to jump in. Yes, Dr. Edwards.
Yeah, I really wanted to jump in there because I feel that is a kind of distraction, this whole homosexuality being a crisis. We must be honest in recognizing that sexual violence against women, girls in Grenada has always been an issue. Many families have experiences where a friend or family member, an acquaintance, will abuse young girls and women and boys and those that are vulnerable. When you factor in issues like poverty, when you factor in other socio-determinants of health, as lack of access to education, those things create situations where folks are incredibly vulnerable. So I don't think it's a question that homosexuality is on the rise in Grenada. What is on the rise is socioeconomic division. What is on the rise is instances where those groups are being vulnerable because of their social location. And what needs to happen is we need to have an honest conversation about sexual violence against girls, women, boys, the poor, those that are living with mental challenges, so vulnerable groups. And that is what needs to be addressed. And that is what needs to be really bring into focus, and not the distraction about a rise in homosexuality in Grenada.
Okay, we have a question here from a commenter. He's saying, question for Dr. Edwards. What can countries do to create that safe space for reporting such abuses? Is there a blueprint or best practices that can be followed? And I'm going to get both Dr. Edwards and Mrs. Burke to answer that question.
That is a really good question. And I'll respond to it by a theory that I learned in school called ecological perspective. I feel there needs to be a response both on a macro, meso, and micro level. So on the micro level, within our families, within our communities, we need to have conversation about sex, sexual health, sexual reproduction. Of course, that is age appropriate, but that as well would normalize conversation at sex. When this notion that you get pregnant, and the buds and the bees nonsense, talk about sex in a way that is appropriate to normalize the experience. So when there's issue around teenage pregnancy, the folk isn't further marginalized and the stigma and the shame that carries. Mm-hmm. On the meso level, the response needs to be through our church, since the church is so pervasive, our school, the police force, those on the front line, allied health folks need as well to encourage and create environments where we can allow people to report the violence that they may experience. Mm-hmm. But all of that must also be housed from a macro level, where government needs to have explicit policies in place that are reinforced and that are actualized to hold those accountable, as well as to ensure that there is some public education across the island around sexual violence against women, girls, and those that are vulnerable, including those with mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, my entry point to this discussion is far more so around the law. So I don't pretend to be an expert on, you know, psychosocial, issues relevant to this
Mhm.
topic. But what I can say about the education in this area is that even within the legal setting, we have done work with victims. We have done work with perpetrators of gender-based violence through the legal aid and counseling clinic where I was the director. We had actual groups that we used to run for perpetrators of GBV and groups for victims. And what we learned from both of those groups, both from the perpetrators and from the victims, is that they weren't having these discussions about sex and sexual health and access to sexual and reproductive health services. Um, the perpetrators tell us that this was never discussed in their household. Sex was always taboo. And then so this mystique developed around sex and sexual relations. Victims said that they too, very few people had these discussions with them. So even from settings within the legal environment where courts have referred victims and perpetrators to locations to get interventions, we're learning from them that they haven't had much exposure to this issue.
Now the other point,
But I
Mrs. Bird.
also wanted to
Yes, go ahead.
add on that one of the issues for me is that, we talk about, you know, oh, homosexuality is on the increase and this has somehow really aggravated sexual assault. There's so many factors, legitimate factors that have contributed to the increase in sexual violence in this country that people are not talking about. I mean,
Mhm.
our whole socialization, right, is one that helps to perpetuate sexual violence. What is masculinity? What does it really mean to be a man? Versus femininity and what it means to be a woman. We set up these gender inequalities from the time people are young. And then the legal system, to some extent, treating it with impunity. And the law is a powerful tool. And if we really wanted to make inroads on prevention of sexual violence, using the law as a mechanism, the enforcement of the law as a mechanism, we would see such a meaningful difference. Calon,
Mhm.
I always give the powerful example of the seatbelt laws in Grenada. When I first came to Grenada, nobody was using the seatbelt. It wasn't the law. Then we decided to pass that law, and we didn't just pass the law. For some reason, the law was vigorously, right? Vigorously enforced. You couldn't go from point A to point B without
Mhm.
being stopped by a police officer and fined. And within months, I saw it with my own eyes. Within months, this society was transformed and people became a buckle up society from the youngest to the oldest person. Once they got in the car and they sat in the front seat or they were a driver, click, they buckled up. If we decide that for issues like domestic violence, sexual violence, that we're going to vigorously, not just pass the law, but vigorously enforce the law. The evidence is there. We can change social attitudes. It can be transformative because the law has that kind of power. I'm not saying that the law on its own is going to heal these social ills, but it is a very, very powerful tool if vigorously enforced, not just passed in Parliament, but if it's taken seriously and enforced, you will see a meaningful difference in how we
Mhm.
deal with these types of issues.
This is a very important conversation, and as I was saying before we went live, I think we need to continue to have these conversations to really put sunlight on this, and to speak about it in a way that's not sensationalized, but to really get down to the brass knuckles here in addressing this concern. We have another question here from Ruel, who says, is there evidence to suggest a correlation between students being away from school as a result of the COVID pandemic, where there may be questionable supervision and an increase in sexual slash domestic violence? Mrs. Burke.
It's too early to tell. I don't
Okay.
believe that the Child Protection Authority, which is the legally mandated agency in Grenada to deal with that, can yet tell us about those patterns, about the
Hmm.
impact of school closure on sexual child sexual abuse. I don't think we're there quite yet
Hmm.
to be able to say what it is telling us in those definitive terms.
Right. Okay. Stay with us, folks. We will take one final break before we come back to wrap up. Thank you. Bye bye.
Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds unconstitutional.
But why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing socio-economic issues that I would want to address with you.
In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bub Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bub Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
All right, folks, welcome back. And before we get to a wrap up, we have some comments coming in here from some of our viewers. Oliver Benoit is saying we do offer a course, Gender Identity in our Sociology degree at the University in Grenada. Mr. Benoit, you might have to specify which university. Is it the University of the West Indies? Is it St. George's University? He's saying we are hoping to change some minds through that education.
SGU.
Yes, he's at SGU. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yes, education is
Kellogg,
a
he's
helpful
referring
tool.
to SGU.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification. Margaret Francis says, in the case of child sexual abuse, what mechanisms are there in place for children to report abuse, and how easy are they to access? Jackie, and perhaps Kizzy can also answer that.
Well, it's funny that we put the onus on children to report abuse because
Mhm.
yes, children can report the abuse that's happening to them, but we all have a responsibility to report child abuse that we know is happening to children. And
Mhm.
Grenada has mandatory reporting laws, right? That says that if you suspect, you don't even have to know for sure. If there's reasonable cause to believe that something is happening, you are required by law, if you are a duty bearer, and that's teachers, police officers, doctors, counselors, all of the even traditional areas where we thought that confidentiality was protected. Mandatory reporting trumps that and says if you know of it, you have to report it,
Mhm.
or not, you're at risk of being sanctioned by the law. So and the reporting is supposed to happen to the Child Protection Authority and the Royal Grenada Police Force because there are two responses that kick in. Criminal response, that's spearheaded by the police, but then there's a child protection response where the Child Protection Agency now has to see what measures they're going to put in place to protect this child. Does this mean that the child has to be removed from the family environment, or what do they really need to do? So children themselves can report this and should report this to um, any trusted adult. They can report this to the Child Protection Authority. They can report this to the police themselves. But I think it's easier for children to know that they can report this to a teacher. They can report this to any adult who they believe have this at heart and will help bring this to the attention of the relevant authorities.
Mhm. Kizzy Ann?
I believe there's
Okay,
also supposed to be a child abuse hotline. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Kizzy Ann?
Sorry,
okay,
Kizzy, go ahead.
okay. Second in everything Dr. Burke said, with regards to the mandatory reporting, especially in the case of minors. At Grenchap, most of our interactions are with young adults. So I'm talking about from community college upwards. That's where we find more engaged. That's the demographic we have more engagement with. We have something called a shared incidents database, which we have trained outreach workers in terms of collecting data. So the shared incidents database is really a Caribbean-wide database system that collects reports from vulnerable individuals, example, persons belonging to the LGBT community. And reason why this database was conceptualized is because in terms of the regular, let's say, regular police systems, for a lot of LGBT persons, there's a lot of challenges accessing those systems. And oftentimes when Grenchap goes into certain spaces, the first rebuttal you hear as to why nothing is being done is because there's no data, there's no record of data, there's no record of homosexual people living in this context. So the shared incident database was birthed out of that reality. And what we do is basically collect, as an organization, we collect reports. So community members know, we would advocate awareness around the SIDS database, letting persons know that we have this database. If you have experienced some form of violence, we can collect it with our database. We have outreach workers who can accompany you to the relevant authorities that you need to go to provide that moral support, because oftentimes if left alone, they may never reach the police station to file that report. So if the individual reaches out, they've logged the report in our database, our outreach workers can accompany them to the police to file a proper report. We also ensure that a copy of that report is given to the victim, and that a copy of the report is kept for our SIDS database as well. We also provide access to free psychosocial support. So the victim will not have to pay to access a therapist through our organization.
Okay, that's very important. Okay, we have some other comments. Jose Honesto says, I think there is a rise in sexual abuses, especially around young people, both girls and boys. We've seen it with the child that was raped and killed by that young man, and also the child that was left in the care of a 5-year-old boy I think he's referring to an incident that happened in Grenada recently where someone else had to fly back to New York. That case was a prominent case that was reported on. Keston Henry says, are there programs in school to discuss sexual abuse and maybe teach teachers to notice those things? Anonymous boards or boxes for children or teachers to drop in information. Mrs. Burke?
We do have HFLE in the schools. A lot has been said about health and family life education in Grenada and, in fact, across the Caribbean. Is it really hitting the mark? And from our standpoint, it is not. When it comes to these types of issues, it's falling short. It is not well taught. The curriculum needs to be significantly improved. And so on these types of issues, it's not facilitating disclosures. It's not getting children to come forward and feel safe about saying this has happened to me. So, and we don't have complaint boxes in the schools. This is something that we've said we would like to see in institutional care for children. That when the state places children in institutional settings, whether it's children who are in conflict with the law or children who are in need of care and protection, there should be a complaint box. These are children who are being deprived of their, who cannot move around as they ordinarily would, who have less access to people to make complaints. And we've asked for boxes to be installed in these types of settings. So I am very much in agreement with that comment. that we need to put mechanisms in place, regardless of how basic they might seem. We need mechanisms to help facilitate disclosures.
Very important. And then Margaret Francis says, I wasn't just putting the onus on children to report, but we know that adults don't. And so a child should also feel free to do so if they are in a situation, and they should be educated on how to do that as well. Mrs. Burke?
Kelon, could I just
Yes.
add
Go
something on
ahead.
HFLE?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because HFLE, the curriculum for HFLE is very, very comprehensive. You know, it covers everything I think it needs to cover as it with regards to properly equipping young people with the resources they need. However, it goes back to, I think it was, can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but it's the separation of church and state. So for many persons who aren't aware, when it comes to the HFLE curriculum and how it's being implemented in the school system, if I'm an instructor and for my religious beliefs, I think certain topics in HFLE are not in keeping with my faith and my religious teaching, then I can willfully choose not to teach those topics. And there is no mandate in place to say you cannot just pick and choose the elements of the curriculum you feel comfortable teaching. And I think that is where a major, major roadblock is. That instructors still have the onus to say, well, I'm not comfortable talking to these children about sex, so I just wouldn't cover this topic. It doesn't mean that the topic isn't in the curriculum, it's there.
I get that, and to the point about separation of church and state, I also think we have to acknowledge, to your point, Dr. Edwards, and to Kizzy's point, that a majority of schools in Grenada are parochial schools, in as much as they are administered in many respects through the Ministry of Education. The religious organizations, I attended an all-boys Catholic high school. A lot of schools in Grenada, a lot of the popular schools are run, that they have denominational boards that control a lot of things. So I think when we want to have the conversation about separating church and state, that we also have to acknowledge that would be very difficult given the role that churches play in managing those schools.
Absolutely, Kellen. I agree with you, and I think the hesitation to teach that topic, so the resistance that some teachers may have, and the underreporting of sexual violence is tied to impunity, it's tied to shame, it's tied to stigma, and I think what we're not having is the significant mental health concerns that creates for our folks. And this conversation, I think, should be framed even in broader context, where as enslaved people, our parents and our parents' parents may have experienced all kinds of trauma. And I feel that some of the poor parenting, some of the choices that are made are probably residually tied to internalized and transgenerational trauma. So not only are we looking at sexual violence, but we're looking as well economic violence, psychosocial violence, and that creates some real challenge for Grenadians, especially those that are most vulnerable. I believe they stand much more at the intersection, opposed to Grenadians who perhaps has greater access to capital, social capital, education capital, and so on and so forth. So it's not a one cap fit all. I feel the more vulnerable you are, the more significant your mental health concerns will be, and perhaps you'll be closer to experiencing sexual violence, economic violence, and emotional abuse.
Now, this is a very deep conversation that needs more time, but we are almost out of time, and I would give you good folks the opportunity to wrap up. Certainly, this was an education. I think for our viewers and listeners, it was also an education for me. So I would start with Mrs. Burke.
I suppose as a person who's always looked at these issues within the context of legal responses, I want to end where I started off, in acknowledging that we have made considerable progress, both to the reform of the law as well as to some of the institutional responses. We now have a gender-based violence unit in the Ministry of Social Development, a special victims unit in the police. So we are coming, I think, closer to terms with the international standards that we need to meet in responding to sexual violence. However, because of how far this journey still has to go, we cannot become complacent. There's lots of areas in the procedural law that still need to be addressed. There's still a wide scope for improvement in terms of our in terms of our institutional responses. We don't specialize in these areas. We don't have specialized prosecution units. We don't have specialized courts. We don't have, the capacity building that should be happening, the ongoing training that is required. If we are talking about due process, an integral feature of due process is competence. Well, if you're not training and creating the levels of specialization that is warranted in this area, then you are not meeting those requirements of due process. So my final take on all of this is yes, we have to acknowledge we've come a long way, and people like myself who've been on the front lines of this battle for years, I've seen the progress, but I'm warning and cautioning the authorities that we still have such a long way to go. So let us not, rest on our laurels. Let us take this forward in a way that is as effective and treated with the sense of urgency that it deserves.
Kizian?
Okay. My takeaway from the entire discussion would be reporting. Reporting is so important. And I think so many of us have access to information, because I think a lot of the questions that were coming in was how to, what, these kind of questions. There's Google. There's so much you can learn in terms of what are the signs and behaviors that children exhibit when they're experiencing trauma, whether they're experiencing sexual violence. And I think as a society, we don't need to wait till something happens for us to get all riled up about it. We should be riled up about it on a day to day. We should be educating ourselves on what are the signs and symptoms so that we can exercise prevention before things happen and escalate, and then now we be looking for somebody to blame, or we looking for an institution to blame. Educate ourselves on who are those whom are most vulnerable, and take some onus on yourself when it comes to reporting these things, especially when it involves minors. In a lot of instances, as adults, you see things that are suspicious, you see things that just don't sit quite well with you, and a lot of times you choose to ignore it. And then something happens, and then you're the first person to pick up the phone to say, girl, but you ain't know why the suspect this long. That's psychotic behavior, and you're part of the cancer.
So if you see something, say something. Yes, message. Okay, Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, my takeaway is that there are significant health and mental health consequences tied to sexual violence. And to Mrs. Burke's point about the system, the legal system being in place, I feel as well there should be really strong psychological support in place, a system that is confidential. We talk a lot in Grenada. We go to see a therapist, we go to see a professional, but somehow a neighbor knows our business. And I feel that needs to be addressed as well. This notion of being confidential, keeping people's information private, exercising professionalism, I feel might create a space for reporting. Nobody's going to report if the system isn't in place to support a person with dignity and respect. And there is no homosexual crisis in Grenada. I have to stick that in. What's a crisis is the uttering the socioeconomic issue, and government needs to be responsive, and not NGO organizations also need to be responsive. If your society is sick mentally, it would be to detriment. Progress would perhaps be an issue.
Mm-hmm. This was a very important discussion, folks, and I thank Dr. Baez for listening in, because I know that you did say that you wanted to, hear what the panelists had to say. How do you react as we close, Dr. Baez, to what you heard?
Really interesting, very timely and necessary. It's a conversation not just for Grenada, but of wider Caribbean as well. So I also want to express my gratitude to the panelists.
All right. Let me therefore take this opportunity to thank the panel for joining us today and also thank our viewers and listeners. Next week, Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique will be celebrating 40 years as an independent nation. We will be reflecting on the significance of Grenada's political independence through a post colonial lens. I repeat, through a post colonial lens. And you'll be hearing more about that next week, 47 years later. I am Kellen Bub, and it has been my immense pleasure for another installment of the Bub Report. Have a great week to everyone. Panel, please don't go away. Stay there.